The city never saw it coming. Skyscrapers gleamed under the golden morning sun, and the streets buzzed with life. People rushed to work, children laughed as they played in the park, and traffic crawled along Main Street as impatient drivers honked their horns. It was just another day, until it wasn't. Daniel Carter, a veteran firefighter, leaned against the fire truck outside Station 42, sipping his coffee. The air smelled like fresh bread from the bakery across the street. It was peaceful. Then the first scream shattered that peace. A woman collapsed near the bus stop, her body convulsing violently. Pedestrians rushed to help, but then, she stopped moving. Silence followed. Then, to everyone's horror, she rose again. Her head snapped toward the closest bystander, a young man in a business suit. Without hesitation, she lunged, sinking her teeth into his throat. Blood sprayed as he shrieked in agony. Chaos erupted. Daniel dropped his coffee. What the hell? More people began collapsing in the distance. Some twitched on the ground, others screamed in pain. Then, one by one, they got up, different, their movements jerky, their eyes vacant. The city was changing before his eyes. A police officer rushed in, ordering people back. He aimed his gun at the woman, shouting for her to stop. But she didn't. She pounced. The officer fired once, twice, but she kept coming. Daniel took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. Then, the sirens started. From every direction, fire alarms blared, ambulances howled, and distant gunshots cracked through the air. Smoke rose over the skyline. Something was terribly wrong. The fire station radio crackled with frantic voices. This is dispatch, reports of violent attacks citywide. Officers down, repeat, officers down. Daniel turned to his crew. Get ready. We're moving out now. But as he grabbed his gear, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking. His wife's name flashed on the screen. He answered immediately. Emily? What's happening? Danny. Her voice was filled with terror. They're everywhere. The neighbors, oh my God, they attacked Sarah. His heart stopped. Their daughter. I'm coming home. Stay inside. Lock the doors. But before she could answer, a deep, guttural growl sounded behind him. He turned. The police officer who had been attacked was standing again. His lifeless eyes locked onto Daniel. Blood dripped from his open mouth. Then he lunged. And the nightmare truly began. The streets were no longer streets, they were battlefields. Daniel slammed the fire station doors shut, heart pounding. Outside, the infected were multiplying. People ran, screamed, and fell, only to rise moments later as something else. He could hear the desperate voices crackling through the station's radio. Unit 5 is down. Oh God, they're eating him. Stay back. Stay, AGGHH. The hospital, it's gone. We can't hold. Then static. The city was collapsing. Daniel's mind raced. His wife and daughter were out there. He had to get home. But how? His fellow firefighters stood frozen, staring at him. Waiting for orders. Listen up. Daniel barked, slipping into command mode. This isn't a fire. This isn't a riot. This is something worse. We don't have time to figure out what's happening, we need to get to our families. Now. A rookie, Jared, swallowed hard. Shouldn't we wait for help? Daniel shook his head. Look around, Jared. No one's coming. Through the fire station's glass windows, they saw buildings burning. People screaming. The infected tearing into anything that moved. Police cars flipped over, their sirens still wailing. It wasn't just one part of the city, it was everywhere. Nowhere was safe. The first choice, fight or flee. Daniel grabbed his gear. We take the fire truck. It's big, fast, and can plow through anything in our way. Are we just leaving everyone else? Another firefighter, Martinez, asked. Daniel clenched his jaw. If we stop for everyone, we die. We get to our families first, then we figure out the rest. Reluctantly, the others nodded. They climbed into the fire truck. Jared behind the wheel. Martinez in the passenger seat. Daniel and the others in the back. The engine roared to life. Hold on, Jared muttered. The truck surged forward, smashing through the station's garage doors and onto the chaos-filled streets. The city falls apart. The world outside was unrecognizable. A bus had crashed into a storefront, flames licking up its sides. A man in blood-stained clothes sprinted past, pursued by two infected, once a mother and child. Daniel's stomach twisted as the man tripped. The undead were on him in seconds. His screams were short-lived. Jared gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Where to? East Side, Daniel said. My family's there. They drove fast. Too fast. Running red lights that no longer mattered. Swerving around wrecked cars. Dodging the people who still ran for their lives. Then, bam. Something hit them hard. The truck skidded. Metal screeched. Jared fought for control as they careened into a row of parked cars. What the hell was that? Martinez yelled. Daniel turned, his breath caught. A military transport vehicle had slammed into them, its front end crumpled. Armed soldiers spilled out, weapons raised. Out of the truck, a soldier bellowed. Daniel's team hesitated. The soldiers looked just as terrified as they did. Are you evacuating people? Daniel asked. The soldier, his name tag read Sergeant Reeves, shook his head. No evacuations. No rescues. The whole city's under quarantine. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out. Daniel's blood ran cold. You're locking us in? Reeves didn't answer. Then, gunfire. From the alley, infected charged toward them. Soldiers opened fire. Bullets tore through rotting flesh, but they didn't stop coming. Daniel grabbed Jared. Move! The fire crew scrambled as the undead crashed into the soldiers. Screams. Gunfire. Chaos. Daniel made a split-second decision. The truck was done. They needed another way out. Run, he shouted. They sprinted toward a department store across the street. Their only hope was to find shelter. Behind them, the city burned. And in the distance, the howls of the undead grew louder. Daniel and his crew barreled through the glass doors of the department store, their boots pounding against the polished tile. Behind them, the undead flooded the streets, their guttural moans growing louder. Martinez, panting, yanked a metal clothing rack in front of the entrance. This won't hold for long. Daniel's eyes darted around. The store was massive, 2 floors of clothing racks, electronics, and home goods. But it wasn't empty. A dozen survivors emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Drop your stuff, barked a man with a baseball bat. His face was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, not from infection, but exhaustion. We're not looking for trouble, Daniel said, hands raised. We just needed to get inside. A woman stepped forward. She had short black hair, a rifle slung over her shoulder. Who are you? Firefighters, Daniel said. We got caught in the chaos. The woman's gaze flicked to the doors, where the glass shook under the weight of undead bodies. Then she nodded. Lower your weapons, guys. They're not infected. Daniel exhaled. For now, they weren't enemies. The reality of survival. Introductions were brief. The woman, Nina, had been trapped in the store with her group for nearly 2 days. They had barricaded the entrances, rationed food, and tried not to turn on each other. People lost their minds fast, Nina admitted. Some tried to run. Some didn't make it. Daniel surveyed the survivors, men, women, even a teenager clutching a bloody kitchen knife. They were scared. Hungry. Desperate. Jared whispered to Daniel, "How long before they decide we're a problem?" Daniel didn't answer. He already knew the truth. Being trapped with people was just as dangerous as being trapped with zombies. The cracks start to show. The department store wasn't a sanctuary, it was a prison. The undead pounded the glass doors, their twisted faces pressed against the glass. The barricades held, but for how long? "Any plans to get out of here?" Daniel asked. Nina shook her head. "Tried the roof. It's a dead end. The back exit leads into an alley filled with those things." Martinez spoke up. "If we don't leave soon, we're gonna run out of supplies." That set everyone on edge. A man named Rick, a former security guard, glared at them. "So what? You just showed up, and now you want to use our food?" "We can help," Daniel said. "We're trained. We can." Rick cut him off. "We don't need help. We need less mouths to feed." The tension thickened. Some of Nina's group looked uncertain, others looked ready to throw Daniel's crew out. Then, crash. The break-in. The front glass doors gave way. A swarm of undead poured in. Screams erupted. The survivors scattered as zombies lunged toward them, knocking over shelves, tearing through mannequins, slipping on broken glass. Daniel grabbed a fire axe from his belt. "Move!" The first zombie, a middle-aged woman in a torn business suit, lunged at him. He swung the axe, the blade biting deep into her skull. She crumpled. Jared and Martinez fought too, using makeshift weapons. Nina fired her rifle, dropping 3 undead in rapid succession. But it wasn't enough. "There's too many," someone shouted. The group raced toward the stairwell, hoping to reach the second floor. But then, a scream. Daniel turned. Rick was dragged down, 3 zombies ripping into him. Blood splattered the floor as he shrieked. The survivors kept running. There was no time to save him. Nowhere left to hide. The group slammed the stairwell door shut, barricading it with whatever they could find. Panting, Daniel turned to Nina. "That back exit, you said it's in an alley, right?" Nina nodded. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Then that's our only way out." The survivors weren't safe anymore. They had one choice: fight through the alley, or die inside the store. And the undead weren't going to wait. The pounding on the stairwell door didn't stop. The undead relentlessly slammed against the metal, their moans echoing through the stairwell. "We don't have much time," Daniel said, gripping his fire axe. Nina turned to the survivors. "The back exit is our only shot." "But the alley is full of them," a teenage boy, Ethan, protested. "Would you rather wait until they break through?" Martinez snapped. Silence. The answer was clear. A desperate escape plan. Daniel took charge. "We need a distraction. Something to draw them away from the alley." Jared scanned the second floor railing. "What if we throw something loud onto the street? The noise might pull them away." Nina nodded. "The electronics section has Bluetooth speakers. We can blast music." Daniel turned to the group. "All right. Nina and I will get the speakers set up. Jared, Martinez, you get the back door ready." "What about us?" Ethan asked. Daniel's eyes hardened. "Stay out of the way. If this goes wrong, run. The betrayal begins." Daniel and Nina moved fast, weaving through overturned shelves toward the electronics section. They grabbed 2 large speakers, quickly syncing them to a phone. "What's the loudest song you've got?" Daniel asked. Nina smirked grimly. "Something fitting." She hit play. Heavy metal blasted through the store, shaking the walls. The effect was immediate. The undead at the front entrance staggered toward the noise, abandoning the alley. The ones pounding the stairwell door grew restless, turning toward the music instead. Daniel and Nina dragged the speakers to the edge of the balcony and shoved them over. The speakers crashed onto the street below, still blaring music. Outside, dozens of zombies lurched toward the sound, clearing the alley just enough for an escape. "Let's go!" Daniel shouted. They raced back to the others, but something was wrong. The doors were already open. Daniel skidded to a stop. Jared and Martinez stood near the back door, weapons raised. But the door was already unbolted. Already open. And the alley was no longer clear. "What the hell happened?" Daniel shouted. Then he saw her. A woman from Nina's group, Angela, stood by the door, eyes wide with fear. "You opened it early," Nina said coldly. Angela's hands trembled. I thought you were taking too long. I was scared. I thought." "You just let them back in," Martinez growled. The alley, once their escape route, was now flooded again with the undead. The noise had worked, but Angela's panic had doomed them all. Chaos erupts. Before anyone could react, the undead poured in through the open back door. The first zombie grabbed Angela, its rotting teeth sinking into her shoulder. She shrieked. Gunshots rang out as Nina opened fire, dropping 3 zombies. Martinez swung a metal pipe, cracking a skull. Daniel hacked through the undead, his axe slicing deep. But it wasn't enough. The infected were inside now, and there was no escape route left. "Run or die. We need another way out," Ethan yelled. Jared's eyes darted toward the maintenance hallway. "What about the loading dock? It might be clear," Nina shouted. Daniel knew they had no other choice. "Go!" The group sprinted through the chaos, dodging snapping jaws and clawing hands. Angela, still screaming, was dragged down. They couldn't save her. They didn't stop running. As they reached the loading dock doors, Daniel slammed his fist against the release button. The metal doors creaked open, revealing the outside world. And in the distance, the city continued to burn. The loading dock doors slammed shut behind them with a loud clang. For a brief moment, it was silent. The screams and moans of the undead were muffled by the thick metal barriers. They were outside, but they weren't safe. The alley was now swarming with infected, and the once bustling street was now a graveyard, smoldering buildings, abandoned vehicles, and scattered bodies. Daniel, his heart pounding, scanned the street. "We can't stay here. There's nowhere to hide." Nina wiped blood from her forehead, her rifle heavy in her hands. "We need a plan, and we need it fast." Jared's voice was shaky. "Where do we go now? Everywhere's crawling with them." "Head for the outskirts," Daniel said, pointing toward the horizon. "There's a warehouse district. We can find shelter there." "We're not getting far," Martinez muttered, shaking his head. "We can't outrun them forever." Daniel didn't have an answer. Outrunning them wasn't the goal anymore. They weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to find somewhere safe. And that place seemed farther out of reach with each passing hour. The walking dead and the dead within. They moved quickly, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the shadows. Every corner they turned, they heard the distant shuffle of the undead. But with each step, a new worry began to fester within the group, the tension. The cracks in their fragile alliance were starting to show. Angela's death weighed heavily on everyone. The decision to open the back door had been hers, and in the chaos, they hadn't been able to save her. Daniel could see the blame in Nina's eyes. He could feel it in the air. Trust had already begun to fracture. "We should have waited," Martinez snapped. "We rushed it. Now we're all screwed." "Shut up, Martinez." Nina shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "It's not helping. Don't talk to me like that." Martinez's fists clenched. He was on the verge of snapping. Jared stepped between them, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Guys, stop. We're not going to survive if we keep tearing each other apart." Daniel put a hand on Martinez's shoulder, pushing him back. "Not now. Not here." The last thing they needed was a fight. The world was already collapsing around them. They couldn't afford to fight each other. The desperate decision. As they reached a narrow side street leading to the warehouse district, Daniel stopped. "We're close. But there's a problem." Nina narrowed her eyes. "What kind of problem?" Daniel glanced around. The street was eerily quiet. Not a single soul in sight. The lack of noise only made the situation more unsettling. "There are barricades ahead," Daniel continued. "We'll have to break through." "What's the point?" Martinez asked, his voice laced with frustration. "What if there's nothing left? What if we're just running for nothing?" "We don't know what's ahead, but we don't stop now," Daniel said, his voice firm. "If there's even a chance." Bam! The sound of a door being kicked open interrupted him. From a nearby building, a man appeared, his clothes torn and filthy. He raised a shotgun, aiming it at Daniel. "Stay right where you are." The survivors froze. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his axe. The man didn't answer. Instead, he waved the shotgun toward them. "You got a group." "I got a problem with groups." Nina tensed. "We're just trying to survive. We're not looking for trouble." The man narrowed his eyes. "Everyone's looking for trouble. That's the problem." A sickening realization hit Daniel. This man wasn't looking for a conversation, he was looking for an excuse. Betrayal from the inside. Without warning, the man fired the shotgun, not at them, but into the air. The loud blast sent the nearby undead stumbling toward them, drawn to the noise. "Run!" Daniel shouted. The man laughed as the undead began pouring down the street. "You think you're going to make it out of here?" "No one makes it out." The group ran, leaving the man behind. They didn't have time to argue. The undead were already closing in. But in the chaos, Daniel glanced back. Jared had slowed. He had stopped to look at the man. And then, he did something Daniel never expected. He turned back. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniel screamed. But Jared didn't listen. He ran toward the man with the shotgun. Betrayal. Trapped in a broken world. Jared was no longer part of their group. He had chosen the man over them. Nina, tears in her eyes, shook her head. We can't trust anyone anymore." Daniel's heart sank as they fled further into the warehouse district. Jared's face, the face of a friend, a fellow survivor, had disappeared into the chaos. Now, it was just them. Survivors alone in a city overrun by the undead. There was no turning back. No hope. Just one brutal, endless struggle for survival. The air was thick with smoke, and the stench of decay clung to the streets. The once bustling city had become a graveyard, a labyrinth of destruction and despair. Daniel's feet barely made a sound on the cracked pavement. He kept his eyes ahead, forcing himself not to look back. The betrayal of Jared gnawed at him, but now wasn't the time for weakness. There was no time to mourn. The group moved swiftly through the warehouse district, ducking behind abandoned trucks and crates. The streetlights were out, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The eerie quietness of the area was broken only by the distant groans of the undead and the occasional crash of a building collapsing under its own weight. The hollow silence. Nina scanned the area, her rifle held tight against her shoulder. "We need to find shelter," she said quietly, her voice filled with the weight of the situation. "Somewhere we can barricade ourselves for the night." Daniel nodded. He felt the same urgency. "Agreed. But we need to keep moving. We can't stay in one spot for too long." They reached a large warehouse at the end of the street. The doors were partially open, and there was no sign of movement inside. "This should work," Daniel said, motioning toward the building. "Let's get inside and see what we're working with." The door creaked as they pushed it open, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise silent city. Inside, the warehouse was vast, filled with empty shelves and scattered debris. The faint smell of rust and oil lingered in the air, but it seemed like a safe haven, for now. The cracks widened. Inside, they quickly began to work, pushing heavy crates against the door to barricade it. But the silence was suffocating. Martinez, who had been quiet for most of the journey, finally spoke up. "You think this is the end of the line for us?" Daniel didn't respond immediately. The thought had crossed his mind, too. The city was falling apart. The undead were everywhere. The world as they knew it was gone. "We don't know what's ahead," Daniel finally said. "But we're not done yet. We survive, or we die trying." But as the words left his mouth, the group felt the weight of their reality. How long could they keep going? Could they really survive in a world like this? The tension was building. The betrayal of Jared still lingered in their minds. The decision he made, turning against them, aligning himself with that man in the street, had cut deeper than any wound the undead could inflict. Familiar faces, unfamiliar truths. As the group settled into the warehouse, each person found their own corner to breathe. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching him. He turned and found Nina staring at him, her face shadowed by the dim light. "What's going on, Nina?" Daniel asked, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know," Nina admitted. "But this doesn't feel right. We're falling apart." Daniel's gaze softened. "I know. But we can't fall apart. Not now." Nina's eyes darkened. "I know, but I'm not sure we can keep going if we can't trust each other. We've already lost Jared. What happens when we start losing more?" Daniel's stomach twisted. It wasn't just the city that was falling apart, it was them, too. And Nina was right. They couldn't afford to lose each other. The warehouse was silent except for the occasional shuffle of feet and the soft breaths of survivors who hadn't yet fallen asleep. But in the distance, the faint sounds of the undead were creeping closer. Their moans, like whispers of the past, reminded them that nothing was safe anymore. A glimmer of hope. But then, as Daniel sat in the dim light, something caught his eye, a faint glow in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, just a flicker of light in the broken city, but it was enough. "Do you see that?" Daniel whispered to Nina. Nina looked up, her eyes squinting. "A light. Is it a flare?" "It could be a signal," Daniel said, standing up. "Maybe there's someone out there. A group, a safe place. We need to check it out." The others were already gathering, ready to move at a moment's notice. They were tired, hungry, but the hope of finding others, of finding something in the ruins, was too strong to ignore. "Let's go," Daniel ordered. "We don't wait for the undead to find us." The city's final lesson. As they moved through the streets once more, the light ahead grew stronger. The city, now nothing more than a shadow of what it used to be, felt alien. The buildings, once proud, were now nothing more than hollow shells. The air was thick with the heavy scent of decay and destruction. As they neared the light, Daniel's hope began to fade. It wasn't a flare. It was the glow of fire. Nina's voice broke the silence. "It's a fire. Someone else is out there." Daniel hesitated. "Or they're burning everything down." But they didn't turn back. They were too close. The fire could be a signal of life, or the end. Either way, they had no choice. With every step, they moved closer to the unknown. But one thing was certain, the city was no longer their home. There was no safety here. No place that could offer refuge. Not anymore. And they were about to find out just how far the hell of this new world could stretch. The fire ahead was burning brightly, its orange glow cutting through the darkened streets like a beacon in the night. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and ash, mixing with the metallic tang of fear. Daniel, Nina, and the others moved cautiously forward, staying close to the shadows, avoiding the main roads. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of uncertainty pressing on their shoulders. As they rounded a corner, the fire became more visible, a large blaze, flickering in the middle of what had once been a bustling neighborhood. Nina's voice was a whisper. "Do you think they're burning things to keep the undead away?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. The fire could be a signal of something hopeful, or it could be another trap. But they were too close now to turn back. The world had already betrayed them. They weren't afraid of betrayal anymore. The faces in the flames. They reached the edge of the fire, careful not to be seen. In the light of the flames, they saw movement, people, silhouettes against the inferno. Daniel squinted, trying to make out their shapes. They were survivors, no doubt, but what kind of survivors were they? The kind that welcomed newcomers, or the kind that took what they could and left the rest to die? Stay low, Daniel instructed. We'll approach cautiously. Let's see if they're friendly before making a move. The group nodded in agreement, their weapons at the ready, but their hands were shaky. Everyone had learned by now that nothing was ever as it seemed. As they neared the edge of the burning area, the figures came into clearer focus. A small group of survivors, at least a dozen, stood near a barricade made of scrap metal and burning wreckage. Some were armed, others appeared to be tending to the fire, but all of them looked worn out. Nina whispered, "Do you think they can help us?" Daniel didn't respond right away. He didn't want to get their hopes up, but at the same time, the need for connection was overwhelming. They were so close to finding something, anything, that resembled safety. The call to danger. One of the survivors spotted them. A woman, holding a baseball bat, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she took in the new arrivals. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice sharp and wary. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We're just looking for shelter. We saw the fire. We need a place to rest." The woman studied them for a long moment, her eyes flicking over each of them with a critical eye. Finally, she spoke. "You're not the first to show up here looking for refuge. But there's no room for weaklings." The words stung. Daniel's chest tightened. "We're not weak," Nina snapped, her voice cold. "We've been surviving in this hell for months." The woman nodded slowly, then raised her hand. "I'm Sarah. We've got a few rules around here. You follow them, or you leave." "What rules?" Daniel asked, his voice cautious. "First rule, don't draw attention. We keep a low profile, and that means no loud noises, no unnecessary risks. Second rule, if you want in, you work. We don't have time for freeloaders." Daniel exchanged a glance with Nina. "We can work. We just need a place to stay." Sarah didn't seem convinced, but she motioned toward the fire. "All right. You can join us for now. But one wrong move, and you're out. Got it?" They nodded, and Sarah led them closer to the others, the warmth of the fire beginning to soothe the tension in their muscles. It felt like they were finally finding a place to breathe. The uneasy alliance. As they settled around the fire, the group fell into an awkward silence. Some of the other survivors watched them with suspicion, while others kept their heads down, tending to their own work. It was clear that these people had become hardened by the world they now lived in. No one was interested in small talk. No one cared about what had happened before. Nina finally broke the silence. "How long have you been here?" Sarah, who had been leaning against a crate, shrugged. "Too long. We're just trying to survive. There's no point in asking how it all ended. It doesn't matter now." Daniel felt a sharp pang in his chest. Survive. That was all it was now. The world they knew, gone. The people they loved, gone. The city, gone. Another man from the group stood up, his expression hardened. "You need to know something," he said, his voice low. "This place isn't safe. We've had people leave and not come back. People who thought they could find something better out there. They didn't." Nina's eyes darkened. "What happened to them?" The man's gaze grew distant, and he shook his head. "Doesn't matter. We don't ask questions. The world's different now." Daniel felt the walls closing in around him. He had hoped, foolishly, that there might be something left of the world they once knew, some glimmer of humanity. But instead, all he found was more of the same. Survival above all else. The long night ahead. As the night deepened, the survivors gathered closer to the fire. Some of them had begun to prepare for sleep, but no one truly rested. The fear was always there, the undead, betrayal, starvation, all of it loomed in the air like a storm waiting to break. Daniel lay back on a bed of old rags, staring up at the flickering sky. The smoke from the fire hung in the air, blending with the lingering scent of death. His mind kept circling back to one thought: what was next? The world outside was unforgiving. There were no easy answers, no clear paths. There was only the harsh reality that every day could be your last. As the fire crackled, Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, they could survive. The night was long, but the dawn might bring a new beginning. Or it might bring more of the same. In this world, you never knew. The morning came reluctantly, the first light of dawn filtering through the broken windows of the warehouse. The fire that had burned through the night was now just a collection of smoldering embers, casting faint shadows on the walls. The group was still alive, but that fragile sense of safety they'd found around the fire felt more like an illusion now. Daniel sat at the edge of the wreckage, his eyes scanning the horizon through the cracks in the warehouse walls. The city around them was eerily silent, but he knew the peace wouldn't last. The undead were always there, lurking just beyond their sight, waiting for any sign of weakness. Nina approached him, her face gaunt, but determined. "We can't stay here much longer, Daniel. We're just waiting to be surrounded." Daniel looked over at her, his jaw tight. "I know. But for now, it's the only place we have." The others were stirring, some gathering their things, others just sitting, lost in their own thoughts. Even Sarah, who had seemed so firm the night before, now appeared unsure, a deep crease between her brows. "I don't like this place anymore," she muttered, stepping closer to Daniel. "This fire, it's just a signal. We've had people come here, and they don't come back. It's just a trap." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "So why stay?" "Because we're still alive." Sarah's voice was quiet but full of a weary, stubborn resolve. "Because, until something better comes along, it's as good as we've got." Tension in the air. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the air outside the warehouse was charged with the uneasy knowledge that whatever was coming, whether the undead or something far worse, was on its way. Martinez stood near the barricade, his gun clutched tightly in his hands. He was scanning the street through a small crack in the door, his face tight with worry. "I don't know about you all, but I'm done sitting here, waiting to die. Either we move out, or we risk staying here until the Horde finds us." Nina nodded. "He's right. We've been sitting too long. Waiting. And the longer we wait, the more chances we give them." Her voice was hard, no longer the soft, weary tone it had been the day before. Jared's betrayal was still fresh in their minds. It hadn't only broken trust, it had broken something deeper inside them. No one could forget that feeling of being abandoned. They had lost too much already. They all turned to look at Daniel, who hadn't moved. His eyes were tired but sharp, his mind wrestling with the decision that loomed over them. The path forward. "Where do we go from here?" Martinez's voice cut through the silence. He was impatient, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Daniel stood up slowly, his gaze drifting over the others. Their faces were a mix of exhaustion and resolve. They had nothing left but each other, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. "We head out," Daniel said firmly, his voice gaining strength. "We can't keep waiting for the end. We take our chances, and we move forward. We stick together, and we survive." Sarah spoke next, her voice quieter, yet no less determined. "We go north. There's a refugee camp up there. It's been a rumor, but I've heard there's a real chance. Maybe we'll find something better. Something worth fighting for." For the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered in the group. The notion of escaping, of finding something better, resonated with them. They'd had their backs to the wall long enough. Now, they were choosing to fight for a future. Jared had left them, but they weren't going to give up. Not now. The final decision. The survivors packed what little they had, gathering their weapons and supplies, preparing for the long journey ahead. It wasn't going to be easy, and they all knew that. But at least they were choosing the path forward, instead of being pushed down by forces beyond their control. As they made their way toward the exit, Daniel took one last look at the warehouse, a place that had offered them a brief respite but would now only remind them of what they had lost. They had all changed here. Survival had cost them more than they realized. Nina turned to him as they walked, her voice soft. "Do you think we'll make it, Daniel?" Daniel gave a small nod. "We have to." And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. They moved toward the broken city, the streets silent as they stepped out into the uncertain future. The Horde might be out there, and the world might be on the brink of total collapse, but there was one thing they knew for sure. Nowhere is safe anymore, but at least they still had each other. And that was something worth fighting for.